So I've been testing out all of the brand new and some viral complexion products, everything from liquid foundations to underpainting palettes to mattifying setting sprays. And today I'm going to share with you all of my experiences with all of these products. And at the very end, we're going to see which one is the standout product from them all. If you guys are new here, hello, my name is Christina. And to give you guys a little bit of background before we begin, I have oily acne prone skin. And these days I fall anywhere in the light medium to medium category, and I also have a neutral undertone. I do want to note that I also live in a very humid climate, so the way that these complexion products are going to work for me is very specific to my environment, and please remember that they may work completely differently for you. For a lot of these wear tests, I did try to make it a point to not use too many primers or setting sprays or anything like that because I really wanted to see how these worked, and then as I did more wear tests, I kind of customized it to what I felt like that specific complexion product needed. So for instance, I tried to prime my face with the same primers, I tried to set them with the same setting powders or setting sprays if I did end up doing that. But I will note those things for you guys as we're talking about the products. Okay, so I'm going to be breaking this down in categories for you guys, and we're going to start off with liquid foundations. This is the Makeup by Mario Surreal Skin Natural Finish Foundation. I have the shade 11N, and in terms of color match, this one is slightly more olive/green on me, but I still would say that it works pretty well. I feel like a lot of different makeup brands are coming out with larger ranges of foundations, but not only that, they're also coming out with more undertones such as olive undertones, and it's a little bit tricky for me personally because number one, I'm not good at shade matching myself, and number two, the photos online for marketing, they're very similar for neutral and olive tones. Like I can definitely tell the difference when I have them swatched side by side, but online it's just a little bit harder for me, so please bear with me when it comes to that. But I can still make this work for me with a little bit of concealer finagling. So when I use this, I did prime my skin with the Myricks moisturizer. The texture of this one is super runny and it's very, very thin. Like once you pump it on the back of your hand, which is typically the way I like to apply my foundations first, you can see that it immediately starts running down the hand. It feels extremely serum-like, I would say, and it applies very similarly and more like a skin tint because of how lightweight and runny this feels. I was having an active breakout going on my chin. You guys can see this in the footage, and as I was applying this, it did tend to kind of cling to the acne, not too badly to where I was like, I need to wipe this off, but I definitely noted it, and it was kind of surprising for me because of how runny and lightweight this texture was. But I will say that the day that I tested this foundation out, it was probably one of the worst days in terms of healing that acne because I was using my benzoyl peroxide, my salicylic acid treatments, like all the things, so that area was very dry and flaky. Nowhere else on my face did I notice anything like that going on. So the coverage for this foundation, I would categorize as being a light medium coverage. You can still see all of the hyperpigmentation and stuff that I have going on the tops of my cheeks with one really light layer, and that's not atypical. I do see that very often with a lot of complexion products, and then I'll go in with a more high coverage concealer or more layers of that foundation or concealer, what have you, just to get the coverage that I want. But in terms of this acting alone, I will say that it was a lighter layer of coverage. And with saying that, I kind of felt like it overall didn't really give me enough coverage or how much I usually prefer before going on to the concealer step. And that's another reason why I felt like this one really reminded me of a skin tint before I set it down. I did do those multiple layers like I mentioned, and it looked good. Like it still looked really nice, but you can only push the coverage of this one so far, you know? Once you set this one down, it looks more matte. It was a little bit, again, heavy around my chin area, but also like on my upper lip and my nose. Those areas it didn't seem to really want to set down the same way it did on my forehead and my cheeks. And I would say those are the areas that I had less foundation in, which was really interesting. Overall, it lacks coverage compared to one, what I typically like, and two, what I was expecting based on the descriptions. I truly wasn't as in love with this foundation as I thought I would be. Their first foundation, I actually had a full dedicated video on, and I loved that foundation so much. But again, as I've stated like more this year, my taste in coverage and finish and stuff have kind of evolved and changed. I am more interested in a satin or matte finish versus before when I really loved everything dewy. So I can't really compare the two in the way that my preferences have changed, but I can say that that one blew me away right away. This one didn't necessarily do that. Probably the most ideal customer for this product is someone that wants a skin tint look and feel, but also something that might translate a little bit more matte than your standard skin tint will. This gives you that same look, but it's not super dewy, super greasy, and you don't have to use as much setting powder to get this to more of a matte state. And I do think that this lasts longer than your average skin tint. But with that being said, talking about the wear test of this, at the very end of the day, I wore this for about 8 hours the first time I wore it. I was super oily at the end, so it didn't really hold up in terms of keeping my oils at bay. And I did use my usual setting powder routine, so that's going in with a pressed powder and a loose powder and then a finishing powder. So I powder a ton, and at the end I was still quite oily. I didn't use any setting spray or anything like that because I wanted to see how this would kind of perform on a regular face of makeup. I'm looking at the description on Sephora, and it does say that it's supposed to provide all day shine control and up to 16 hours of hydration. Did it give me 16 hours of hydration? Probably, because I was very oily at the very end, but all day shine control, I wouldn't necessarily say that worked for myself. If you do plan on wearing this throughout an entire day and you do have normal to oily skin, I believe that this is going to require some touch-ups and powderings throughout the day. And I do think that it'll still look really nice as long as you get ahead of getting too excessively oily. Because overall, at the end of the day of wear tests, I do like to blot my oils and repowder to see if the actual foundation can be salvaged, even when it's been pushed to its limits. And this one did really well once I did that. I blotted and I powdered at the end of the day, and it still looked really lovely. It's just that personally, my oils really did come through and it did not prevent that. And also on that note, it didn't seem to accentuate anything or cake up once I touched it up. It just seemed like a true layer of oil just came through on my entire face, and I just needed to remove that. The makeup underneath still looked untouched. So that's kind of why I think that if you have anything other than really oily skin, this will probably really impress you because it's weightless, feels like a skin tint, gives you really nice even coverage, and overall your skin still looks really nice. Moving on now to the Natasha Denona Hy-Glam Foundation. I have the shade N9, and all of the shades in the foundation translate to the same exact shade in the concealer, which makes it very easy for someone who is bad at shade matching to find their shade. You guys, I had a time trying to shade match myself to the concealer itself, so doing that twice, I might have lost my mind. I am a fan of the Hy-Glam concealer. When I first tried it out a couple of years ago, I did not like it, but then a couple years passed, and like I said, my taste in products, specifically in complexion products, have changed a lot, and I tried it again, I got a new shade, and I love it. It's one of my go-to concealers now. So for this wear test, I did apply the Merit moisturizer underneath this as well, and about 2 pumps of product will cover my entire face when I use this. This one does again have a runny texture. It's not going to be as runny as the Makeup by Mario one, so I have applied this a couple of different ways. I've applied it with a brush, and I've also taken my fingers and spread it across my face before blending it out with either a brush or a damp sponge. It works pretty well either way, but I tend to gravitate towards using a sponge with this. So the shade itself is almost perfect for my actual face. My face and my body are 2 different shades, and it translates as a little light compared to my body because of that, but I think that this would still be considered the closest match to me because it does match my face so well, and it also matches my neck really well, so that gradient just kind of makes sense and there's not like an intense contrast. The finish of this one, I will say, is more on the natural side of things. It's not too dewy, it's not too to matte. It's like right there in the middle. It almost just looks like you did a really nice skincare routine, and that's typically how I like to start it. Either like that or slightly more matte before going in with the rest of my makeup. I feel like under powder, this one still looks like healthy skin, and sometimes if I go in with light layers of powder, like maybe I'm just dusting a little bit of loose powder, then it doesn't look too glowy either. Something interesting about this one is that they actually recommend that you let this foundation set on your skin for 15 minutes after blending. Natasha herself has said this in multiple demo videos that she's done. So what I like to do is I try to do other makeup steps before moving on and back to my complexion. So for instance, I'll put this foundation on and then I'll move on to my eyes or my brows, and I'll do all of that before moving on to applying my concealer and all of like my blush and bronzer and stuff. But to be honest, 15 minutes, that's a really long time to ask for people, especially if all they want to do is just get their face of makeup on and then get out the door, because a lot of us are going to an office or going to work and don't have 15 minutes to carve in to let your foundation set. So the majority of the time that I have used this, I have probably only waited like a max of 10 minutes before going in with the rest of my makeup. So I can still say that this works well even if you don't wait that entire 15 minutes. I would say that this has a medium coverage, like a true medium coverage, maybe also a little medium to full. As this kind of sets down, you're seeing a little bit more coverage, and you can then build on top of it with lighter layers just in the areas that you need it, and it still looks really nice and flawless. Everything kind of meshes together. And of course, after doing everything, I did still set this down with my powders like I normally do. So again, that's a pressed powder, a loose powder, and a finishing powder. I don't think I did any setting spray for this one either. Now, on the day of this wear test, we did go grocery shopping. We cooked for a couple of hours because we did meal prep. I was outside a lot. It did end up raining that day as well, so it was really muggy. And it was really, really hot outside. So by the end of the day, when I looked at this, it was about 10 hours of wear. My oils definitely did come through by that point. I also noticed that I had a pimple by the end of the day, but I'm unsure if it was because of this foundation. Like I said, at this time when I was testing out a lot of the foundations and stuff, I was going through a hormonal breakout. I did wear this foundation though for 3 days straight. It could be that, it could be the concealers that I was testing out. Who knows? But I do feel like it's still worth noting, even though I don't know what it was from, it was there. And my chin was still healing from that hormonal breakout, and it looked a little bit crusty on my chin where I had those breakouts that I was treating. But again, it wasn't so bad that I just kept looking at it and it bothered me too much. I really didn't notice it too much, other than having to really examine my face for the wear test. I think with consistent blotting and touch-ups, I'm pretty sure that this foundation would look pretty flawless. Again, I did my little blot at the end of the day and then repowder, and it looked very nice. I had no complaints. It still looked like I could wear that face of makeup for a couple more hours. I didn't really have much complaints with this one. And this is also the foundation that I'm wearing today, if you guys are curious. Now, the Sephora Collection Best Skin Ever Foundation reformulation, they did recently redo the foundation and the concealer of this one. I know that a lot of people were concerned because this foundation apparently was a hit for a lot of people. I would love to hear from you guys if you were a big fan of the original Best Skin Ever foundation and you've tried the new one. What are your thoughts? I don't personally have my old bottle anymore, so I can't really compare the two anyways, but I would love to know from someone that has more experience with the OG version. I talked about this foundation in a recent first impressions video. Originally, I had the shade 21O, which again is an olive tone, so it did look quite warm and quite green on my complexion. So I went back and I purchased 19N, originally thinking that this one was going to be way too light, but this is actually a very good shade match for me. Go figure. So for this one, they claim that it is a natural finish, but I would say that this is a little bit closer to a matte finish on me, especially once this dries down on the skin after application. I kind of go back and forth on a brush and a sponge, but I think for the majority of the time I am using a sponge for for this one because that more matte finish I feel like just pushes in and blends into my skin better if it has that extra assistance from a sponge, from a damp sponge. The coverage on this I would say is a pretty strong medium coverage for me, and like I said, it does dry down quickly, so you'll want to work in sections for this one. I like to go in on one side of my face before going in and blending on the other side. Out of the foundations that we've talked about so far, I would categorize this as being the most matte one. For me, while I'm in the process of applying this foundation, I would say that this is very near to a self-setting foundation. Now, I don't think that there's any foundation really out there other than maybe the Tier Red Mask Cushion foundation that I can confidently go out and not set down and that I would call a self-setting foundation. But I think that this is close to a self-setting foundation because the way that it sits on the skin, I would assume that if you were dry, you probably wouldn't need to set this down with any powders. Or you could probably just go into areas that you typically get more oily and like leave the rest of your skin, and I think that it would perform really well that way. I really liked the finished face of makeup whenever I wore this foundation. I felt like the skin looked really flawless, very nice and matte. In terms of the wear test, even though this one started off the most matte, surprisingly I still did get oily faster than I anticipated to. This one I tested on a day that we were out and about and it was raining again. Can you guys tell we're in the rainy season here? We were out for a couple of hours, not super long. I want to say maybe 3, maybe 4 hours. I would say around 6 hours. I was producing a lot of oil, what I would consider a lot of oils. I think that a setting spray would have definitely helped though with the longevity of it because it wasn't like immediate, you know, it was through the progression of the 6 hours. I think that a setting spray could have kind of held off that oil a little bit longer. I still do think that it wears really nicely, but I would suggest that you still go in with your powders and your setting sprays if that's what you typically do. Don't go in thinking that this is going to be a one and done type of complexion product. I really think that this shines because of how perfected the skin looks directly after application. Your skin really looks soft focused, and if you only need to wear this a few hours, I think it would look great throughout the duration of that wear. So for instance, for me, I think that this would be one of the foundations that I would reach for to film because it's going to look really nice and matte and kind of hold its integrity throughout the time that I am filming. I don't hate it. I actually really like this one. So these were all of our liquid foundations. I do like all of them, but if you guys wanted to know which one kind of wins out of these 3 liquid foundations, I would say the Natasha Denona Hy-Glam Foundation. This one lasted very long. It applied very easily. It set down really nicely. I really enjoy the way that it makes my skin look, and I think that this one has the most versatility in terms of coverage. And like I mentioned, even though I notice oil production, I think that I could very easily control it with like proper powdering, a pore filling primer, and some setting sprays. And it also helps that the shade match was probably the best one out of the 3. So this one wins out of the liquid foundation category. Okay, now we're moving on to some powders. So we have some pressed powder foundations and we have one finishing powder. Of course, it's gotta be the OneSize Boucle powder. This is a finishing powder, like I said. I have the shade light. I was between the shade light and medium. I did end up swatching the 2 in stores and I compared the shade to some of my favorite finishing powders. And I also saw online that they were recommending that you go lighter if you're looking to use this as like a more targeted finishing powder, or you can use like your normal skin tone if you want to go in with like a fluffier brush and all these things. So I ended up just going with light because I didn't want to accidentally have a powder that would like darken areas that I wanted lighter, you know? First of all, I do want to say that I don't like this packaging. That's probably the biggest con for this one. I don't like how cheap this packaging feels. Like this little button thing, it feels like it's going to break in a few months, and when you close it you really have to kind of like see, kind of finagle, like it doesn't want to close. You have to really get it to where it's exactly in the right spot, which is why I feel like this might break sooner rather than later. I really hope not. I hope that the packaging holds up. But the product itself, it feels extremely lightweight on the skin. It really does feel like a straight up finishing powder, not a setting powder. You know how sometimes if you use a powder that's too thin and too finely milled, it gives the skin an unnatural look if you're using it as a setting powder. This will definitely do that. I would suggest to go in with a separate setting powder, whether that be a loose setting powder or a pressed setting powder, before going in with this one. Now, I do think that there is a bit of a learning curve with this if you're not used to finishing powders in general, but also just as a finishing powder, even if you do have experience with them. So when I first used this, I did use a fluffy brush to just fluff this all over to set down everything that I had going on. The intention of this powder is to perfect the look of your skin. I don't know how to explain this. So setting powders are going to set all the makeup that you have going on your skin for longevity, while finishing powders are going to kind of transform the look of your skin after you finish everything. So for instance, Hourglass, those are finishing powders where it makes the skin look more ethereal. This one is kind of in that same category. When I first used this and I fluffed it all over my skin, I did not feel like it gave me an intense transformation. This is being heavily talked about and advertised on TikTok, and people are doing what people do and just saying that this is the most transformative product they've ever received. And maybe it's because I had those high hopes, but I was at first not impressed. I was like, it didn't really do too much for my skin. I'm not gonna lie, like it didn't make my skin look like I have a filter on. But like I said, I have been doing ample testing of all these products, this one included. I've used it on several different foundations, several different complexion products, and I find the best way for me to use this one is going to be with a little triangle puff here, and then really pack it on there, tap it on the back of my hand, press it all over the skin. That is when I have the most transformative look and feel to my skin with this powder. It really does, if you use it that way, make your skin look very airbrushed. It's beautiful. I have it on today and I feel like it just makes your whole complexion look softer. Like it makes your skin look softer and yeah, I guess airbrushed. When I use it with the powder, I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, it's fine. But when I use it with the powder puff, that's when the magic happens. Now, the real question though, for me was, is this going to rival or also take the place of my Kosas Cloud Set powder? This is my go-to setting powder or finishing powder, I'm sorry. And I love this so much. So I use this one in the same exact ways that I would use this one. And I will say that while they are both beautiful, they're not going to take the place of each other. This one is still a holy grail, and this one is still a very good product. Do you need both? Probably not, but I would recommend if you're looking for a good finishing powder, one of these has to work for you. Like it just has to. My favorite ways to use this so far that I have found are actually as a touch-up powder. I think that it makes the skin look super soft again and very mattified, very airbrushed. I could probably use a little bit right now actually. So I'm going to go in with the powder puff, tap it, and then just refresh my face here. And it looks so good. Like it really does smooth out all those pores. And even if you have oils coming through, very little oils right now, granted, it's just going to soak it all in and make it look like it wasn't even there. The more and more I use it, the different ways that I use it, the different combinations of concealers and foundations and what have you that I've used it, it just continues to impress me. And again, I do want to emphasize that this does not seem to be preventing any oils. This is truly a finishing powder in the sense that it's going to change the look of your makeup. It's not necessarily going to keep your oils at bay more than just a regular powder would. I think it'll help, but I don't think that this is going to be the product to make that happen. I really like it other than the packaging. Moving on to our pressed powder foundation. So bareMinerals came out with their original pressed powder foundation. They reformulated this one as well. I'm going to be honest with you guys, with bareMinerals, it's really hard for me to determine when something is new and when something's reformulated because everything is so similar with slight changes. So this one is going to be the original finish versus what they have right now out, which is the matte finish. So this one is easier to tell that it's the original because this one has the embossing while the matte finish one does not. Okay, I have the shade Neutral Medium 15. This is another one where it didn't match me too well in the wear test because I did use a different shade there, but this one matches me way better. So pressed powder foundations are a little bit more tricky for me because it's not what I'm normally using by itself. For the most part, when I'm using a pressed powder foundation, it is to finish or set liquid foundation underneath of it. So these do take me a little bit more work and a little bit more testing to really figure out how they work the best. So the first time that I used this, I did go in with a little bit of my Tower 28 Swipe Concealer just to help out with any hyperpigmentation I had going on underneath it, because typically with powder foundations, you don't want to go over it with a liquid or a cream once you have the powder foundation on there because it can kind of like move it around, you know. The first time that I used this, I had the thought that because it's a powder foundation, it's going to be more drying on the skin. So to help it out, I did go ahead and use my Merit Priming Moisturizer because I felt like it needed a really good hydrated layer underneath it to prevent it from looking dry. I don't know if this would be a surprise for anyone that typically uses just pressed powder foundation, but it was too hydrated. I let it set down for about 10 minutes or so, which is normal for me when it comes to using a moisturizer for primer. And then I went in and I swirled, I tapped, and then I sweeped it on like they say that you should. And I felt like the powder was kind of melting into the primer and it was becoming like this little bit of a creamy situation, but not creamy. Like it was streaky, for lack of a better term. And I was like, oh, this is not working out very well. So on the other side of my face, I did wipe away the primer layer and I let my face fully dry. I got rid of any excess primer and it applied way better on less moisturized skin. So I don't necessarily think that means that you can't use a moisturizer. I just think it's going to apply better if you don't prime it with something so hydrating, because it's going to mess with the powder way too much. It is very, very powdery in the pan. So once you swirl it, there's a lot of kick up. So make sure that when you swirl it, you tap it before you sweep it onto the skin. And I think that in this first impression wear test footage that I have, because the shade that I used was too light for me, I think it also contributed to this not looking as natural on the skin. So with the color aside, in terms of coverage, it looks really great for a powder. It definitely looks like a powder foundation in the sense that it's more matte and pore blurring versus something that's a liquid that you essentially have to go in and later set down with the powder. It's kind of like meshing those two steps into one. So what you normally want from a liquid foundation and what you normally need from a setting powder into one product. Now again, it might be because I'm not used to using a pressed powder foundation as my foundation product, but I felt like I had to use a lot of it to get a good even layer all over my face. That's definitely because I was trying to get more of like a medium coverage. It still felt very light on the skin, especially the side that I didn't have any of the primer on. So one layer of this gave me pretty light coverage, I would say, and I ended up going in with two very significant layers of powder, and at the end of those two layers, it looked super smooth on the skin and it didn't look overly powdery on my skin. I was really impressed by this. So it didn't cling to the acne on my chin. Again, it was more healed on this day that I was testing this powder foundation out, but it also didn't really cover the redness of the acne either. I went in with a concealer brush and the powder to further cover it, but it didn't look great. Like it didn't look like it wanted to cover up any of that redness. So I think in terms of redness from acne, it may not work very well, but if you're looking at evening out your uneven skin tone, I think that's more so what this is going to do for you. It almost feels like a creamy powder. Like it feels like it has more density to it. It feels like almost like if I added water, it would have melted down into like a cream texture, you know? Now here's the interesting thing with the wear test. After about 9 hours, it did get more oily than I thought that it would. I had just assumed that since it was a powder foundation, my oils would just not come through as much. It didn't seem like the powder was trying to mattify anything. Now again, this is the original and they do have a matte version. This one is probably more geared toward normal skin, which I get. But then I was thinking like, how do you set this Do you set it with a setting powder? Like, do you set it with an oil absorbing setting powder? Maybe you could use a setting spray on top of this one. The problem that I have though with pressed powder foundations is that the amount that I use is not as controlled as using a liquid foundation where I go 1, 2 and I get the same amount every time, versus going in with powder. It's kind of a toss up how much you're using. So I feel like there's definitely going to be a learning curve if you're not used to powder foundations. I think I'm still learning how to get this to work the best for me. I would have assumed that once my oils came into play, it would have gotten really cakey and like smeared all over the place. It didn't do any of that. It actually looked very nice. A newer addition to this video, but one that I still wanted to include, they sent this one to me last week, the Laura Mercier Pressed Powder Foundation. This is the Real Flawless Feather Matte Powder Foundation. I have the shade 3W Butterscotch. They sent me 3N, and when I swatched the two, 3W actually looks more neutral than the 3N, which is meant to be neutral. So in terms of the shade range, I do want to note that this one does have a smaller shade range than the bareMinerals one, but with that considered, this shade from Laura Mercier actually matches me better than the bareMinerals one does. I did not prep my skin with any overly hydrating primers this time, but I did go in with a separate concealer before going in with the pressed powder foundation. Once I had this applied, I did apply it with a brush. I did try the little sponge applicator thing here. I do find that's a little bit harder for me though, because I have to go in with way more product. And when I applied this to the skin, my skin immediately looked incredibly soft and airbrushed. I was honestly so shocked by how smooth my skin looked. I'm already a big fan of the Real Flawless collection. I love the liquid foundation. I love the concealer. So I was very pleased that this kind of like fit into that ecosystem really well. Like it fits in with the other products really well. So for coverage, I think that this one definitely gives a light to medium buildable coverage. It's somewhere in that realm, like right in the middle of light, right in the middle of medium. If I apply a matte concealer underneath, it definitely looks like it gives you more coverage. As long as I go in with something that will dry down, I think that's probably the best case scenario for a powder foundation, but with this one in particular. It kind of looked undetectable on the skin. I put this on and then I looked at my skin and I was like, this looks really good. And while I do think that this gives me more light to medium coverage, the texture of my skin was so impressive and kind of transformative that I didn't even really mind. Like it looked like I had perfect skin because I couldn't really tell that I was wearing anything on top, but my skin looked perfected. Like it looked like something had been enhanced. That's the word, enhanced. So for this one, I definitely failed you guys with the wear test because I don't have an end of day clip. But since this did happen just a couple of days ago, I remember thinking that this looked so great at the end of the day. It lasted over 8 hours. I definitely still produced oils. This would probably benefit from some sort of setting spray, but the skin looked great and the powder foundation didn't smudge off at all. It still looked really good. And I still, again, did my same thing where I blotted all of my oils away and then I reapplied this and the skin looked so good. And I kept thinking like, why is this so impressive when it's not even really giving me that coverage that I typically want? It really is that finish. That finish just looks so perfected on the skin. And I think that this could definitely double as a finishing powder because this gives me almost the same effect as this one, but with that added powder foundation pigment that you would get, you know, and it just feels like nothing. I don't really want to put this in the same, like I don't want to like put it against these two because these two are very clearly powder foundations while this is a finishing powder. I think this one we can opt out of which one is better, and I think it's pretty obvious based on my wear test and review that this one I think I'm having a much better time with. As someone that is not typically reaching for a powder foundation, this one just is a lot easier to work with. It gives me a little bit extra something, and it also doesn't seem like it's trying to compete with my liquid foundations. It kind of gives me a totally different look. Okay, this is the part of the video where you guys get to tell me, haha, I told you so, or you were wrong, because I will admit it when I I was wrong about this product. I talked about this in a Curvings Makeup Craving video. I was telling you guys that it doesn't seem like something you would need. Why would you go out and spend $60+ on something you can achieve with products that you already have, which still true, still very true. But I think I was wrong about this. I think I judged it too harshly, and I felt like because it seemed like something everyone was curious about, I picked it up just on the sole fact that I felt like I had to test it to let you guys know what I think, and I really do enjoy this. You don't need it. You don't need any of this, really, but I'm just letting you guys know what my experiences are. I got the medium shade. I thought that I was either going to be light or medium. I'm glad I went with the medium. I think the light, these colors right here, the highlights and concealers, would have been way too like pasty on my skin tone. I really like this color corrector. It reminds me a lot of the Bobbi Brown Peach color corrector, except not as warm. This one seems to be a little bit more neutral than that one is. And then these concealers, I kind of mix them together because this is a bit light and then this one is a bit warm, so like mixed together, I think they give me a really good combination. These two products, the contour and the bronzer, I think were really what stood out to me at the beginning. These formulas themselves are a bit on the drier side when it comes to a cream that kind of warms up as you blend it into your skin. I've said this time and time again with my color correctors, I like something that's a little bit tackier, a little bit thicker, because when I go on top of my color correctors with concealer or foundation or what have you, I want the color corrector to stay in place and I want the pigment to stay there, but I also want it to be slightly enough to where I can blend it into the areas that I want, you know? This very much reminds me of that. They're going to be drier. You can still blend them as you're working with them because like I said, they warm up on the skin as you're blending. I've used it with skin tints. I've used it with lighter coverage foundations and it works really well. You can still see the underpainting underneath of it. And I think it's really special because it looks quite natural. Granted, you have to use the right type of foundation. And at first I was like, is it doing anything? But when you compare it to just a face of foundation versus a face with underpainting and foundation, you can definitely tell that the underpainting is there. It just looks so seamless. I do think that the textures of these are perfect for their intended use. I have used these on top of foundations to kind of see if I can use it as a regular cream bronzer, regular cream contour and concealer, and they don't work as well. They seem to work way better on just bare skin. I'll go in on top of like my skincare, sometimes I'll go in with a primer, but overall it seems to work the best on top of bare skin. I truly think that these formulas were made specifically for underpainting. And I also thought when I saw this, I was like, man, when it comes to a complexion palette, there's bound to be colors that you don't use, but what I didn't initially think about until I got this in my hands and I was really playing with them is that you have endless amounts of colors in here because you can mix and match. You're not only having to use these colors as your concealers. If these are too light for you, add in a little bit of the bronzer color and get that perfect shade. And the beautiful thing about this is that all of these creams are going to be that same texture. And I think that's probably the most important point that I completely did not think about. It's really nice because you know all of the colors in here have that same exact formula, so you know it's going to work together and it'll blend well together. As someone that's constantly playing with makeup, I guess I subconsciously just know what's going to work together, so I don't really have to think about that. But truly with this palette, you don't have to think about formulas working together. And another great thing is that whatever base that you decide to go on, whether it's a skin tint or a foundation or a regular concealer, it's going to work on the entire face versus if you use a separate concealer, contour, bronzer to do the underpainting, you have to make sure that whatever foundation or skin tint you use works and blends seamlessly with all of those products. Now again, it's not a big deal, especially if you have a huge collection like I do, but it's that extra assurance that it's going to be that much more seamless to use and it's that much easier to reach for versus using 5 different products, you know. I was never an avid underpainter because I felt like it either didn't do too much or it didn't look natural. Something about it always just seemed kind of off and I was like, why do people love this? But I will tell you, this palette gives me the expectation I have with underpainting. I expect it to look natural. special. This delivers exactly what you would want from underpainting. It's not impossible. You don't need this product, but if underpainting is something that you have struggled with and you really want it to work, I do think that this is the solution for it. Coming from someone that was completely skeptical and kind of like, this is going to be a waste of money, I've reached for this a lot. Like a lot. I'm not going to compare this to any of the other products because again, it's kind of its own category, but truly I was so blown away. I was so impressed by this. Let's talk about some setting sprays. So the first one is the Danessa Myricks Yummy Skin Liquid Blurring Balm. I just got the mini. So this setting spray, a couple of things about it. It does have a large powder content. You can hear the little ball in there to really mix it up. And it also has Danessa Myricks trademarked Upslate, which is going to absorb any excess oils on your skin as you wear the product. And they also suggest that you do like a priming spray. So essentially shake it up, spritz it in the air before applying it to the skin because again of that high content of powder. So the mist on this is very fine. I didn't think that it spit at all. Very impressive for something that does have powder. I was wondering if this was going to get clogged. It has not yet. I've had this I think for 2 weeks or so now and I've tested it multiple times. I just do the extra prime spray anyways because they recommend that. So in our application clips I did decide to do 2 different ways of setting. So on one side, my right side, your left, I did set with powder and finishing powder, like my setting powder and finishing powder. And then on my left side, which would be your right, I only set my under eyes. But other than that, I would consider this like not really set down with powder. So I sprayed all over the face. I did an even layer on both sides. And I also took my little triangle puff after a couple of seconds to make sure that the spray was set onto the face. I very lightly tapped it in. I will do that every once in a while with setting sprays just to make sure it really soaks into the skin. And I actually ended up doing 2 layers, which would be the equivalent to what I normally would use with a setting spray. I did spray a little bit of this on my hand to kind of feel what was going on with this, and it definitely leaves a slightly sticky like film. That's kind of what I look for though when it comes to a setting spray, especially like with the Until Dawn, you feel it. It kind of feels like a hairspray, you know? So this gives that same film but not as intensely, but you can still feel it, like it still feels slightly sticky, like it's actually doing something versus something like a hydrating spray. But it was nice because it didn't feel heavy. People have told me that the OneSize Until Dawn is way too drying on their skin, and I can totally see that, especially if you don't have excessively oily skin in humid climates. I can totally see that, but this one didn't do that at all for me. And I actually feel like for those people that want that same power as the OneSize but they don't like it's too drying on their skin, this might be the answer to that. So with traditional setting sprays, I feel like they kind of add a little bit of dewiness and hydration, even if that's not the intended finish. It's just the nature of it. If you're putting a liquid on your skin, it's probably going to show up, you know? So with the Danessa Myricks one, I kind of thought that would be the case too. But when you spray it in and then you kind of tap it in with a clean powder puff, by the way, it almost adds mattifying factors to the skin, which I was hoping for, but I wasn't expecting. So in our finished application clips after I sprayed this, you can really tell with the side that I didn't set with powder beforehand, you can tell that it had mattified the skin more, and I thought that was really impressive. And by the way, I did use the Danessa Myricks skin tint this day, and that one typically does require a lot of powdering and setting spray in order for it to stay on my skin as long as I want it to. And in terms of the wear test, by the end of the day, so it was about 9-ish hours, give or take, you could see the oils in my T-zone, but it was very minimal, and it was pretty much concentrated in my T-zone, which very rarely happens. When I get oily, I get very oily in my T-zone and on my cheeks and on my forehead, pretty much everywhere on my skin. So it was very shocking to me to see that it was just concentrated in those hot spot areas. To give you guys an idea, my face would typically look like that after 6 hours of wearing the skin tint. But again, we went 9+ hours and it looked this good. So the side with the powder, it looked slightly more oily on my cheeks, which was really surprising. And I was thinking about this a lot. And my hypothesis is because with the setting spray, it was making full contact with my skin that didn't have any powder, and it was attacking the oils more than the side that had the powders, because the side with the powder had that extra layer of makeup for the setting spray to get through. So, you know, my oils probably got through before the setting spray got through. I don't know. I could be making this up, but I was really thinking about this. So that's what I think in my head. You guys let me know why you think it might have been different. And at the end of the day, again, I did blot my oils and I actually reapplied the setting spray to see what would happen. And once I tapped it in with a triangle buff like I did originally, the face looked matte again. Like, it looked so good. It's very rare that I come across a mattifying setting spray that doesn't spit, that doesn't feel tight and dry on the skin, that actually keeps my makeup in place, and that I can like see with my own eyes real time, see it mattify the skin as it dries down. And lastly, we have the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Setting Spray, the matte version. I have had ample time with the original version. I've gone through a couple of bottles of that one, and I can say that they are very different. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. So again, this one has the little ball in it, so we are to assume that it has more powder content. Have you guys tried the Anastasia setting spray, the mattifying setting spray? That one, and also the Milk Makeup matte setting spray, those feel very mattifying and kind of tightening on the skin. I would say that this is a little bit less drying than those two, specifically less than the Anastasia one. Now, I will say that the feeling of this I don't think is as noticeable for me as it has been with other people that I've seen reviewing this, because again, I do live in a much more humid climate, so naturally there is more like wetness in the air. So with saying that, I could still feel how this would be drying on the skin, because it still felt slightly drying on my skin, so I can imagine what it feels like for someone that lives in a drier climate. So with this one, I do think that it kept my oils at bay, but I will say that it didn't seem to do it as intensely as the Danessa Myricks one did. I think that this seems like the liquid version of the OneSize Until Dawn, like I said, but it adds a touch, a tiny touch of hydration, but really not much. So at the end of the day, I could tell that I was oily, but it was very minimal, you guys. I could have easily just touched it up and been fine, or I could have just left it and been fine for the night, honestly. It looked really good. It just looked like my natural oils had started coming through, and it didn't look greasy to me. Now again, a lot of people are saying that it's too mattifying for every day, but personally I think that this one would be very ideal if you live in a more humid climate, if you live somewhere tropical, or if you're looking for something generally that's just going to keep your face matte for a long time. This one, it's really good. The spray on this is a little bit more like a shower. It's not a fine mist the same way that the Danessa Myricks one is. So this is Danessa. Nice fine mist there. And then this is the Charlotte Tilbury. I don't know if you guys can tell, this one, as you're spraying it, it feels more like a mist, like a shower type of thing, versus this that feels like an airy mist. Both of these are really great. Now, I do think it just depends on the intensity levels that you're looking for or what you need, and that's going to determine which one is going to work the best for you, or which one you should probably get if you're considering the two. So for me, out of these two, I think the liquid blurring balm is probably the winner. I like the fine mist. I like that it doesn't feel like anything really on the skin. That Upslate ingredient really does seem to help my oil production throughout the day, and it's just something that I feel like could be a really great alternative to my usual OneSize setting spray. Okay, you guys, those were all the complexion products that I tried. There are a ton. There's a lot of things to consider, but let me tell you guys, in doing all of these, on the days that I wasn't doing wear tests and I was like kind of mixing different products and what have you, I was really enjoying one product over all of the others. If we're looking at which one wins out of this whole category, Danessa Myricks, the liquid blurring balm. It's versatile, it's long lasting, it gives me the finish that I need. You can use it in several different ways. It's multitasking. You could see it significantly working without having to really mess around with too much. It wasn't something new within my routine. Setting spray is already something that I do. It just works seamlessly within my routine, and it adds something that I don't already have going going on in my collection. This one just gives that extra something that I think will actually serve me throughout the lifetime of this in my collection. Okay, you guys, what are your thoughts? Which one are you most curious about? Or if you've used any of these products, let us know in the comments what your experiences have been with them. Of course, everything's going to be tagged down below as well as in the YouTube shopping tab in case you guys want to support my channel. If you still want to hang out a little bit longer, then I'm going to leave a video right here that YouTube thinks you're going to be interested in based on what you've been watching recently. But until next time, take care and I will see you very soon. Bye.